August 12, 1944. A railway siding outside Cherbourg, France. 3 German Panther tanks sat on flatbed cars, scorched and battered but largely intact. They had been knocked out during the Normandy fighting and hauled back as prizes. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower had ordered every captured German tank brought to him for one reason. He needed to know the truth. For weeks, reports had been flooding into his headquarters. American tank commanders were dying. Not from bad luck or poor tactics, but from a brutal mathematical reality. The Germans could kill a Sherman from 2,000 yards. The Sherman could barely scratch German armor at 600. Eisenhower stood beside the first Panther as British ordnance officers prepared their tests. He ran his hand across the sloped frontal armor, feeling the quality of the steel, noting the angle, doing the calculations in his head. Then he asked the question that would change everything. How many of these do the Germans actually have? The answer would shock him. It would force him to confront the lies his own intelligence services had been telling him. And it would lead to a complete transformation in how American armor fought for the rest of the war. The invasion of Normandy had revealed a terrible secret. The American Sherman tank, backbone of the Allied armored force, was hopelessly outmatched. Major General Maurice Rose had sent a report that landed on Eisenhower's desk like a grenade. Rose was a careful man, a professional soldier who measured his words. His message was clinical and precise. He had personally observed American 75mm rounds bouncing harmlessly off the frontal armor of German Panther tanks at 600 yards. Meanwhile, the Panther's long-barreled 75mm gun could penetrate a Sherman's glassy plate from distances beyond 2,000 meters. American crews were being sent into combat with weapons that couldn't hurt the enemy, while enemy weapons could destroy them from ranges where they couldn't even see the threat. Eisenhower read the report twice. Then he summoned his chief of ordnance. The meeting was brief and brutal. "You told me the 76mm gun would handle anything the Germans had." Eisenhower's voice was level, controlled, but everyone in the room recognized the fury beneath. "Now I find out it can't knock out a damn thing." The ordnance chief stammered through an explanation. Testing had shown the gun was adequate. The test had been conducted against American armor plate configured to approximate German specifications. They had never actually fired at a real Panther. They had never needed to. In North Africa, German tanks had been rare. In Sicily and Italy, tank versus tank combat was uncommon in the mountains. But France was different. France was tank country. Open fields, long sight lines, perfect terrain for armored warfare. Eisenhower issued immediate orders. Every captured German tank was to be brought to testing facilities. He wanted serial numbers recorded, armor thickness measured, penetration tests conducted with American guns at various ranges. More importantly, he wanted the truth about German production capacity. British and American intelligence had estimated German tank production at 1,400 vehicles per month during 1942. But Eisenhower had his doubts. He ordered a new analysis using serial number analysis. The technique was simple in concept. Analysts collected serial numbers from every captured German tank and armored vehicle. Then statisticians applied probability theory to estimate total production based on the distribution of serial numbers in the captured sample. The results arrived at Eisenhower's headquarters in late August. German tank production in 1942 had averaged 246 vehicles per month. Not 1,400. 246. The intelligence estimates had been wrong by a factor of nearly 6. If the Germans were producing far fewer tanks than estimated, then the concentration of Panthers and Tigers at the front represented a much larger percentage of their total force. Which meant they were committing everything they had. Which meant they were desperate. But it also meant the tanks they were producing, though fewer in number, were far more lethal than Allied planners had anticipated. The Panther tank weighed 45 tons. Its sloped frontal armor was 100 millimeters thick, angled at 55 degrees, creating an effective thickness of over 140 millimeters. Its gun could penetrate a Sherman at 2,000 meters. The Sherman weighed 33 tons. Its frontal armor was 81 millimeters, barely sloped. Its 75mm gun could not penetrate a Panther's frontal armor even at point-blank range. On paper, every engagement between a Sherman and a Panther should end with a burning Sherman. Yet that wasn't happening. American tank units were winning. Not every engagement, not without casualties, but they were winning more often than they were losing. Eisenhower needed to understand why. He ordered his operations officers to compile after-action reports from every significant tank engagement since D-Day. What he found surprised him. American tank units were adapting. They had figured out on their own what the Ordnance Department should have told them months earlier. Don't fight fair. September 1944. 3rd Army's Combat Command A, 4th Armored Division, held positions near Ericourt in eastern France. General George Patton's lightning advance across France had stalled east of Nancy when fuel supplies ran out. Eisenhower had prioritized supplies for Montgomery's Market Garden operation in Holland. Patton's Third Army sat on the German border, out of gas, while the Wehrmacht rushed reinforcements to the front. The Germans saw an opportunity. 5th Panzer Army assembled a powerful striking force. 262 tanks, many of them brand new Panthers fresh from the factories. Their mission was simple. Destroy the American bridgehead, recapture Nancy, push Patton's army back. Hitler himself had approved the operation. Against this force, Combat Command A could field 90 tanks. Most were Shermans with 75mm guns. By every measure, the Americans were outgunned, outnumbered, and about to be destroyed. The German attack began at dawn on September 18, 1944. But something went wrong from the start. The Panther crews had received 2 weeks of training. Most couldn't navigate with maps. The Panthers themselves, despite their fearsome reputation on paper, suffered from chronic mechanical problems. By contrast, the Americans had been fighting since Normandy. They had learned. They had adapted. They knew their Shermans couldn't win frontal duels with Panthers. So they stopped trying. September 19th, the main German thrust hit Ericourt just after 7 in the morning. Fog blanketed the approach routes. German tank commanders, unable to see landmarks, advanced in a disorganized column along the main road. They expected to find scattered American outposts, light resistance. Instead, they found Colonel Bruce Clark's Combat Command A waiting in prepared defensive positions on commanding terrain. The Americans had advantages the Germans hadn't anticipated. Better radios. Every Sherman could communicate with every other Sherman and with supporting artillery. Better training. American crews had practiced fire coordination until they could mass fires on a single target within seconds. Better intelligence. Reconnaissance units had provided exact locations of German assembly areas. And better use of terrain. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole commanded a Sherman in the 37th Tank Battalion. He watched through his periscope as the first Panthers emerged from the fog, 500 yards out. The Panthers should have spotted the American positions by now. But the German crews were scanning the wrong ridge line. Poole didn't wait for permission. He traversed right, laid his sight on the lead Panther's flank, and fired. The 75mm gun couldn't penetrate a Panther's frontal armor. But the side armor was only 40mm. At 500 yards it might as well have been paper. Poole's first round punched through the Panther's side hull, detonated the ammunition storage, and the German tank erupted in flames. His loader had another round in the breech in 6 seconds. Poole fired again. Another Panther, another flank shot, another kill. The remaining Panthers tried to deploy into combat formation, but they were trapped on a narrow road with ditches on both sides. More American Shermans appeared on their flanks. Artillery began falling. Within 15 minutes, 9 Panthers lay burning. The survivors retreated in disorder. This wasn't how the engagement was supposed to go. The Germans had superior tanks. They should have won. But they had attacked into a well-coordinated defense without proper reconnaissance, lost the initiative immediately, and paid the price. The pattern repeated itself over the next 11 days. German forces would attack with superior vehicles. American defenders would use superior tactics, combined arms coordination, artillery support, and devastating air strikes. Every time, the result was the same. By the end of September, German forces had lost 86 tanks destroyed, another 114 damaged or abandoned. Of the 262 tanks 5th Panzer Army committed, only 62 remained operational. 4th Armored Division lost 41 tanks during the entire month. The kill ratio was better than 3-1 in favor of the Americans, achieved against an enemy equipped with tanks that were, on paper, vastly superior. Reports from Ericourt reached Eisenhower within days. He studied them with intense interest. Here was proof of what he had suspected. The Sherman's technical inferiority could be overcome through superior tactics, training, and leadership. Eisenhower called a meeting of his senior commanders in late September. Patton attended, along with Omar Bradley and Bernard Montgomery. The question was straightforward. Should the Allies shift production to the new M26 Pershing heavy tank, which mounted a 90mm gun, or continue mass-producing Shermans and accept their tactical limitations? Patton spoke first. The Sherman was adequate. Not ideal, not perfect, but adequate for the mission. He argued that tanks weren't supposed to fight other tanks. Tanks were supposed to exploit breakthroughs, attack supply lines, disrupt enemy command and control. The Sherman's real advantages were reliability, mechanical simplicity, and availability in numbers that could sustain offensive operations despite losses. The Pershing, for all its firepower, was heavier, required more fuel, and production was ramping up too slowly to make a difference in 1944. Montgomery disagreed. British forces had developed the Sherman Firefly, mounting a British 17-pounder gun, specifically to counter German heavy armor. Montgomery argued that quality mattered more than quantity. Eisenhower listened to both arguments. Then he made his decision, and it reflected everything he had learned from analyzing those captured Panthers. Production would continue to focus on the Sherman with gradual introduction of the Pershing. But more importantly, Eisenhower issued new tactical guidance to all armored units across the European theater. Do not seek tank versus tank combat. Use combined arms warfare. Coordinate with infantry. Mass artillery fires before engaging. Call in air strikes whenever possible. Use terrain to close ranges before firing. Fight smart, not fair. This was the fundamental shift that emerged from the analysis of captured German tanks and the battles of autumn 1944. The American army had entered Normandy believing that good tanks and brave men would win battles. By October they understood that wars are won by systems. Systems of logistics, systems of communication, systems that integrated armor, infantry, artillery, and air power into a coordinated whole. Patton took Eisenhower's guidance and refined it into doctrine that would define Third Army operations for the rest of the war. By December, Third Army had reached the Saar River. And then everything changed. December 16, 1944. The Germans launched their last great offensive in the West. 3 armies, 28 divisions, over 1,200 tanks. The objective was Antwerp. The result was the Battle of the Bulge. Eisenhower's response demonstrated everything the Allies had learned since Normandy. He identified the shoulders of the German penetration, reinforced them, then assembled overwhelming force for a coordinated counterstrike. And he called George Patton. The meeting took place at Verdun on December 19. Eisenhower asked how quickly Third Army could disengage, pivot 90 degrees north, and attack into the flank of the German offensive. Patton's answer became legend. 48 hours. 3 divisions moving in 48 hours. On December 22, 4th Armored Division, the same unit that had fought at Ericourt, began its march north toward Bastogne. 100 miles in winter weather. They covered the distance in 3 days. On December 26, lead elements broke through and reached the encircled 101st Airborne. This was Eisenhower's vision of armored warfare made real. Not tanks dueling tanks in open fields, but armor as a mobile operational reserve, sustained by sophisticated logistics, coordinated with infantry and artillery. The Sherman was perfect for this role. Fast, reliable, produced in numbers that allowed commanders to maintain offensive momentum. The counteroffensive against the Bulge demonstrated all the tactical adaptations that had evolved since June. American tank commanders no longer sought to match German heavy armor in direct combat. They used terrain to close ranges. They coordinated with tank destroyers. They called in artillery. They used infantry to protect flanks. They fought as integrated teams, and the Germans, for all their technical superiority, couldn't match American operational tempo. By January, the Bulge had been eliminated. German losses exceeded 100,000 casualties and 800 tanks. The Wehrmacht's last strategic reserve in the West had been destroyed. In the final analysis, what changed between June and December 1944 wasn't the Sherman tank itself. What changed was understanding. The American army entered France believing technological superiority would guarantee victory. They learned through brutal experience that victory belonged to the side that could integrate all capabilities into a coherent, flexible system. Patton's Third Army became the exemplar of this approach. His tank units didn't seek fair fights. They sought advantageous engagements. They used speed to dictate terms. They used combined arms to multiply effectiveness. And they won. Records from Ericourt, from the Bulge, all told the same story. When American tank units followed proper doctrine and used terrain wisely, they defeated German armor even when outgunned. After the war, analysts examined the question that had haunted American tankers since Normandy. Could a Sherman match a Panther in combat? The answer surprised observers. Properly employed Shermans achieved kill ratios exceeding 3-to-1 against Panthers. Not because the Sherman was superior mechanically, but because American crews fought better. They had superior training, better logistics, better coordination. Most importantly, American tankers understood what Patton and Eisenhower had drilled into them. Don't fight fair. Use every advantage available. Fight smart. Win. Survive. The Sherman tank wasn't the war-winning superweapon that propaganda claimed. It wasn't the death trap that critics have portrayed. It was a tool, and like any tool, effectiveness depended on how it was used. In the hands of veterans, coordinated with combined arms, employed according to sound doctrine, the Sherman was lethal. That was the lesson Eisenhower learned from those captured Panthers analyzed in the summer of 1944. Technology matters. Training matters. Logistics matter. But doctrine matters most. An inferior weapon used properly will defeat a superior weapon used poorly every single time. By May 8, 1945, the question that haunted Eisenhower in July 1944 had been answered. Not with a miracle tank, not with technological breakthrough, but with doctrine, training, and adaptation. The Sherman was good enough because the men who crewed it, the officers who commanded it, and the system that supported it had become excellent. That was the real revelation those captured panzers helped expose. Not that American tanks needed better guns, though that would have helped, but that American forces needed better tactics, better coordination, better employment of capabilities they already possessed. Once that lesson was learned and applied, the outcome was inevitable. The Second World War wasn't won by superior technology alone. It was won by superior adaptation, by organizations learning from mistakes faster than enemies could exploit them, by leaders who understood that doctrine trumps equipment, and by soldiers who fought with courage and intelligence even when odds seemed impossible. That is the lesson of Eisenhower, Patton, and the Sherman tank. That is the story of how captured enemy vehicles changed American armored warfare forever.